Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about how we, as Access Point, implemented Azure Privileged Identity Management in our environment, some of our thought processes around the philosophy that we take and how we apply those to our customers. So I'm Scott Pack. I'm the Senior Director of Security Engineering at Access Point. So I've been working in a full-time security role for about 20 years now in various industries. The past 5 years, I've been working purely in a consulting fashion, working with, again, a lot of different customers, both big and small, in a lot of different fields, regulated and not, providing primarily advisory and engineering support.
And my name is Kevin Hartwig. I began my career more on the software engineering front, and about 10 years ago transitioned to be more on the cloud site reliability engineering area. I've worked for a number of government and startups helping them build out their kind of performative and cost-efficient solutions in the cloud. And as Scott mentioned, we work for a company called Access Point Consulting. We kind of pride ourselves on being a hands-on cybersecurity company. And again, as Scott mentioned, one of the big things we want to call out here is that this is an implementation we did for our company, but we do very similar implementations for others. This is just something we thought was kind of a neat tool and maybe kind of not something a lot of people are talking about as far as privileged access and privileged identity in the ecosystem. So this quote I saw was kind of apt for the discussion, and me being an SRE and DevOps, I kind of hit this point a lot with my my teams. So giving everybody admin access is like giving everybody a chainsaw and asking them only to trim the hedges. So this is kind of a big thing for most of us. I'm sure you've all been asked as part of your role to say, hey, I need access to this system without much real need from the user's point of view. Back in my day, one of my first jobs in the DevOps space, I actually got asked during an interview, hey, how much access would you like on day one? And I was one of the few, I think, during that interview to say, I don't really want any access on day one, like figure out what I need and I'll kind of build the trust over time. So that's really how we want to think about building out solutions for privileged identity. Just make sure that you give people these privilege and work from there. As with all of our solutions, we kind of came up with like some goals for our implementation. And this is kind of the big piece here where we want to make sure that we're covering least privilege. We want to make sure that we are following role-based access controls wherever possible. It's just, best practices in the industry. We want to make sure that we have time-bounded access where possible. Make sure that people don't always have permissions for the rest of their lives and you never take it away. Auditability, us being a cybersecurity consulting company, auditability is key. Making sure that you understand like how your systems are running, what information is coming in and how people are using your systems. And then of course, ease of use. You can't implement a product that isn't easy to use. Your users will find ways around it or they just won't do their jobs. So making something easy to use the first time and when you're at a heightened like incident or something like that is very important.
Yeah, so we've talked about privileged identity management. We've kind of discussed basic goals on what we're looking for, but what is it really? When we talk about this, we're really looking at how we manage the permissions that specific people have, when they have it, and how they're allowed to use them. So as we said, some of the big concepts that come into it that we focus on most were how the approval process worked, how the activation process works. So does somebody need to be involved when you turn this on? Does it just happen? Do you have it all the time? Do you have it only for a certain period of time? And then that kind of ties into the just-in-time provisioning, just-in-time access. That for certain things that are very important, critical things like global admin in Microsoft 365 or global administrator on an on-prem AD. Those are some very risky roles. So we want to time bound those as close to when they're actually used as possible so that you don't turn something on and then it just sits around, not being used, not being monitored until somebody actually gets around to doing the change that it requires.
Yeah, and kind of the areas that I really like to focus on the observability space is comprehensive monitoring. You don't really know what's happening in your systems unless you have a way to view what's happening in your systems. You'll find out during the worst times, whether that be an incident or a breach or something else that's going on, if you don't have a visibility into how your users are using your systems at all times. Automated compliance. I don't know if there's any compliance people in the room or auditors. But I know that most of us like to deal with audits and things as quickly as possible. Make sure that it's an easy process, not something you want to go back and forth with somebody to try to justify why you've given somebody a certain amount of permissions and part of the role maybe not quite fit that need. So we wanted to make sure that a solution would have that built into it, something that we can generate reports really quickly for people that's needed and keep our compliance staff happy. And then, as I mentioned earlier, user-friendly management and use. So this goes beyond just like how easy it is for the user to use the tool, but also how easy is it for you to administrate the tool. None of us want to spend all of our time doing identity and access management work. It's probably not 100% of anybody's role in this room, so having a tool built in that kind of allows you to implement least privilege and all these other best practices out of the box quickly and can be configured as you grow with the tool is very important. So as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we chose Azure PIM as our solution here. Part of this was because we are a Microsoft shop. All of our stuff's built into Azure. We use Entra. We have all these other tools. So it's kind of a natural stepping off point for our privilege identity management implementation. But I do want to call out that there's a number of IDPs and other tools that you can look at, and they all have similar solutions for how you kind of build out privileged access or privileged identity into their system. So I know I've worked with Okta and AWS IAM, and there's always a better way to kind of give privileged access to people that's time bounded and work it. So once again, think about the concepts that we're talking about here, not necessarily the specific implementation. It's just what we built for our company. So one of the things we liked out of the box with Azure PIM was approval-based workflows are kind of built into the process. So when a user goes and says, hey, I need to elevate into a specific role, you can have it so that it will notify a certain person who has to give that approval before the user is able to actually get that permission. You can also set it up such that it automatically is applied if it's something that's maybe a little less dangerous of a role to apply for that. Role activation customization. So this is something very big in our space. We want to be able to give certain parameters around when we actually activate roles for privileged identity. It could be a location-based thing. It could be based off of a ticket. It could be based off of some other scenario that we want to make sure we're tracking. Generally, when you're using privileged identity roles, you want to have a reason for using those. It shouldn't be just part of your day-to-day work. So we want to track that wherever possible. And then one of the things I really like about it is it kind of works with multi-factor authentication out of the box. Anytime you elevate to a permission, you not only have to give your credentials again that says, hey, I am this person, but then it goes and requires a multi-factor. So if somebody were to gain access to somebody's account, they wouldn't be able to just immediately get a privileged role. They'd have to also prove user, any sort of third-party MFA app or whatever that they are the person. So,
yeah. Then once they actually do that work, then role justification is something that's actually required by default in Azure PIM, which is, I think, a really nice feature. So that happens both when you do the initial configuration and set it up, but then also if it's something that you have to turn on, like in the sudo approach where you have to actively take an action to use this, then you have to provide a justification at that point so that you can not only have the evidence that somebody did this, but also why they did this. And then going back to the audits, I mean, every action you take, every time you turn this on, every modification you make goes back into the Microsoft logging system, just like everything else, just like the sign-in logs, just like your audit logs. So it makes it really nice to get an immediate feedback of what's happening into the same environment that you're already monitoring, that you're already alerting on. And that even goes down to some of the notifications. So notification system is very customizable, so that you can even send not just a log message, but an email out to somebody that's involved. And as somebody who actually manages this in our environment, I get emails all the time when one of my staff is actioning a ticket that I can get told within just a few minutes that they're actually doing this, so that I know immediately that something's happening. And then it's just easy. Since it's already baked into Microsoft, if you're a Microsoft shop, then the interface works pretty much the same way as all the other admin tools. So if your staff are already managing this, then they're probably going to have familiarity with the user experience, with the workflows that go on. And then if your users are using it, then it's still the same thing for them. One of the things that I learned very early on was something that my friend liked to say: security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security. Meaning that if you make it too hard to use, people are going to bypass it and find a way to work around it. Because if you're not a security person, security is not your job. That's not what you're incentivized to do. You're just trying to get tickets done. You're not trying to make sure that we can pass an ISO audit tomorrow. So we want to make sure that we meet people where they work and not make it too hard for them. So project planning. The first step in any good project is requirements gathering. So the way that we implemented this project was we actually tied it into our existing access review process. So our compliance team on a quarterly basis does an access review of our environment. So I just went to them and asked, hey, can you ask a couple of questions? And when you're done, give me the report. Because I wanted a little more details than just, should this person be a member of this group? Should this person still have access to the system? But why do they need access to this? And what is the reason that they're using it? Is it because they happen to get assigned a project a few years ago? Or is it because they also do this other thing as part of their day-to-day basis? So getting both the reason and the need let us go into an inventory to then start building out the rest of the implementation plan.
Yeah, and then of course we kind of went through what our current RBAC situation was. What roles do we actually have at the company? Are they tied to a specific user's title? Are they tied to a team? You know, how is that sort of thing done? Do we need to augment our existing RBAC roles as part of this process or not, based off of the access review? And then I broke out common roles here because like you can kind of think about that as RBAC, but in reality, there are certain roles that you just want everybody at your company to have, or maybe access to certain systems you want everybody in your company to have. I know we use Jira, we use a number of SaaS products. So, you know, you want to kind of build out a base layer of roles that everybody has. And then on top of that, that's where you're kind of cascading these kind of privileged access roles that they're going to use on a day-to-day basis. And then, of course, there's a number of eligibility criteria you need to think of as you're doing this. You know, one of the biggest one. Oh, go ahead.
So when you guys were doing this, was this part of truly just doing identity management, and then you popped on privileged access afterwards? Did you have a different tool, or you just put it all into Microsoft?
Yeah, so we started out with Entra, kind of as our identity management system, and then we kind of hit the point where we were having a lot of people who needed extra permissions to do their job. So not only do we just do security consulting, we have to build this kind of stuff for our internal use. And so we have a number of IT staff or other things that occasionally need to elevate access to make changes and things like that. So that was kind of the reason we implemented it. Oh, you're good. Approval required is kind of like the big thing for us. We wanted to make sure that whatever solution we had some sort of approval process built into it. Maybe not for everything, but at least like as Scott mentioned, for like global admins or maybe some other roles at the company that we really want to lock down and only be used for very specific cases. And then read-only. So you could potentially consider like certain read-only roles as something that maybe you can allow your IT team to be able to view Azure and view how certain permissions are already set up without any real risk. Maybe, not sensitive data or something like that, but just a way to change into a read-only role to actually view how things are configured to help them out. Next up, implementation phase. So I like to think about implementation, especially after like a good planning, as like the easy part of it. Like if you've done your planning and you understand like what you need and out of it, like it should just go pretty smoothly. And so this isn't a complicated slide, and I did that on purpose. Because really the implementation phase was pretty straightforward for us after we got all the decisions made on what roles and groups we needed to do and what users were in them. So for Azure PIM, the first process is to create the role groups. And this is just kind of like a bucket that contains the users and the roles that you're going to allow them to elevate into. This could be kind of a one-to-many relationship sort of thing. And then you add in the roles and the groups of those users. It's pretty much as simple as that. And then I'll let Scott talk to some of the after the fact things. But the reason this slide is so basic is because that's kind of how we found it, is once you're at this phase, it's pretty basic to implement it.
Yeah, and then after you actually create your groups, get the people added to that, then that's when we actually go in and add the privileges, add the configurations to make sure that they can use it the right way. And in this case, again, since everything's just kind of baked in, it's literally as easy as adding the role and then picking, hey, does this role for this group, does it need to be what Microsoft calls active, meaning it's turned on all the time, or does it need to be eligible, meaning that you have to turn it on when you want to use it. And then after we did that, just like everything else, user training, again, since this is part of the Microsoft solution, it's part of the Microsoft workflows, the portals, then if your people are already working in there, then it's going to feel very similar to them, to what they're already doing on a day-to-day basis. In our case, we're working with primarily people that have been managing Microsoft either currently or in the past, and a very technical staff. So our user training was literally just an email that said, hey, we implemented this. Now, if you want to turn this on, you have to go here, and here's the URL to activate your roles. If you have any questions, email the help desk. And that's all we needed to do. But depending on your staff, depending on your needs, you may need to actually have a workshop, record it, write up some instructions. But in any event, the training, the user experience part of it is short enough that the training is, while necessary, should almost be an afterthought for your implementation. So then, after the training, all the cleanup, all the project closure. Now, one of the things that's actually very important to us in a project closure is make sure that we're getting the right security events logged, that security operations is engaged and knows what to look for, knows what they need to learn on and what they need to react to. So since this is a Microsoft tool, it just logs directly into the Microsoft ecosystem. As a Microsoft shop, as a Microsoft partner, we use Sentinel. So all the logs just immediately go in there as soon as we turn it on. There is no extra configuration required. So we worked with our security operations team to make sure to let them know that this is now happening, so that they could go and create any alerts that they needed to, so that they could find out about these activations in real time. And they actually built into their workflow that when anytime something activates, then they reach out to the user and check, did you actually do this? And if you forgot to put the ticket number in your reason, what was the ticket number, so they can close it out on their end. And then from that point, so as a result, we get that full end-to-end logging and collection of what's happening.
Yeah, sorry for the video, by the way. I tried to turn that off as many times as I could, and it just stayed. So I'll blame PowerPoint for that. Anyway, so one of the big things I really like about this implementation is the justifications are tied to the change request. I come from a software background. One of the big things I always do when I'm setting up like my CI/CD pipeline is I have my Jira tickets associated with any pull requests I create inside of GitHub or whatever other thing you're using. Oh, question?
Definitely tell you had a developer's approach to the way this was.
Yeah, exactly. It's the way I think about stuff is like, not only does this allow you to easily look at a request, you can say, hey, this is for a specific thing, this specific change is needed. But after the fact, you can go and say, hey, did they do just the amount of work that they said they were going to do with this privileged escalation role? So that was something that I really like built into the tool, and I think it's something that everybody should probably be using moving forward. A complete audit history. So this is kind of one of those like no-brainers. You really want to understand like both real-time and historically how the tool's being used, not only from like an audit perspective, but potentially just from like day-to-day usage. Like, are employees occasionally using roles incorrectly? Do you need to do some more user training on like, hey, I switched into this role because it's just easier to do my job, but that's not really the intent of the role. So maybe looking about like another access review, as we mentioned earlier. Maybe you need to go and say, hey, this role was designed well, but it's missing this one piece, or it's adding this one piece, and we need to add that to make it a more usable role moving forward. So after our implementation, and this kind of goes with every project I'm in, it's never quite done. There's always things you find along the way that you're like, oh, I really wish I would have done that, or I wish I had more time to do it. So this slide's kind of going over a few of those things for us. Microsoft has these access packages concepts, and you can kind of think about that as more of like a longer term approach to these kind of access roles. So we work for many companies doing consulting work, and occasionally a user will be like, I'm doing IT work today, I'm doing security work today, I'm doing admin work today, and you really just need to have those roles set up for the entire 24-hour or 8-hour period, however long that is. And so we really want to look at how that could be used to kind of augment the privileged identity system we built. And then we really want to look into approval-based activations. I think this is something probably every company should audit on a regular basis. How much time are you spending doing approvals? We don't have large teams. Nobody really does. Nobody wants to spend all their time approving requests. So looking into what actually needs to be approved versus what can kind of just be an always-on approach, or allow users to kind of make that and then do an after-the-fact review, is something that we want to look into a little closer. And then from my SRE background, incident management is a big key here. So how can we augment the privileged identity management to kind of facilitate the ability for anybody who's in an incident to kind of recover quicker. So are there roles that we can create that are break glass roles for recovering from an incident quicker, and kind of use this system to kind of build on that?
And then taking the time-based approach that we had before, where if you turn on a role, you have it for a few hours until it expires, you have to reactivate it. Really expanding that into not just when you're actively using something, how long are you allowed to use it before you have to click the button again, but how long are you allowed to ask for this happen in the beginning. So a great use case for this would be like project-based employees, where you have a specific end time that this project is going to be finished. So you can assign them these roles, these permissions for the duration of the project, and then once the project closes, it automatically goes away. So my father is he was an educator. He spent about 20 years teaching at a university, and when he retired, I remember he had this like massive pile of keys that he had collected from all the different offices and all the different buildings as he got moved from building to building, and some of them probably still worked. Some of those rooms didn't exist anymore. A few of the buildings had been torn down, but he had this big whack of keys and no idea what the risk of that actually was. So with something like this, then when the ability to even ask for that permission goes away, then any of that lingering access also disappears. You don't have to worry about auditing it. It just poof goes away. And then the building on the conditional access system in Intra, like it's super powerful. How detailed, how granular you can get in, and how that works. So that we can even modify some of those permissions so that it's one thing for like me, Scott, to travel internationally, to work remote, check my email, do my day-to-day activity, but maybe I'm not allowed to make changes to deploy a new server, to delete users. That when I activate that permission, then the MFA or the conditional access kicks in and checks Scott's not in an authorized location, so he's not allowed to do that anymore. So really tying in not just what you're doing, but the full picture around your identity, where you are, and how it affects you.
Awesome, and that's the end of our presentation. If you want to come chat with us or find us after the fact, we're at Booth 208 today and tomorrow, and feel free to look us up on the internet or on LinkedIn and add us, and we love to talk tech, so great jump by.
Thank you all.
Thank you.